Hello, folks. I'm sorry I haven't read for you guys in a long time. I love third grade and I was excited to move, but it seems like I spend a lot of time on it. When we read last time, our folks had taken off on their trips. Tiller and Florida had taken off on their boat trip, and Sari and um, Dallas had taken off on their hiking trip, and Mr. What was his name? The guy from the orphanage, Mr. Trepid, had told his wife that he had some investments that he thought were going to come in pretty soon. So, chapter 35 is called Stiff. On the banks of the hidden river, Tiller and Florida were finishing their lunch. You a little stiff? Tiller asked, rubbing his back. A little, Florida said. I'm about swole up and itching to death from these skeeter bites. Tiller stretched. I didn't count on my arms being so numb. Are your arms numb? They're more sore than numb. I feel like I wrestled 100 hogs, Florida said. How are we going to carry on paddling with our arms all sore and pitiful? We'll take it a little easier this afternoon. We'll let the river carry us along. We'll be lazy paddlers. Florida stood on the riverbank, her feet kicking at stones. It's a stinky smell here, don't you think? She said, with the muddy crud and these ugly weed things. Tiller sniffed the air. It's not that pretty smell like by the Holler Creek where those itty bitty blue flowers grow along the bank. Tiller closed his eyes. Oh, I know which flowers you mean. Tiller, do you ever wish Dallas and Sari were here with us going down the river? Tiller took a deep breath, looked down at the river, up the river, and let out his breath slowly and evenly. About every 2 minutes, I think that, he said. You're not like Dallas, Florida said. Is that good or bad? Neither one. Well, how am I different? Tiller asked. Florida kicked at the dirt. Well, Dallas is always thinking everything will be okay and stuff, but you complain a lot. Me? Complain? Yeah, like I do. Oh, he said. It's just our nature. Florida knelt to examine a beetle scurrying along the bank. I wouldn't ever want to be all by my lonesome, would you? Tiller felt his heart do its fluttering thing again. He couldn't imagine life without Sari. It pained him to imagine it. And yet, not a half hour earlier, he had been wondering what it would be like to be floating down the river by himself. That's different, he told himself. That's not forever aloneness. He glanced at Florida and felt another flutter. He hoped Florida would never be alone. You hear me? Florida said. Would you want to be all by your lonesome? No, Tiller said. I need someone to listen to me complain. Florida tilted a twig toward the beetle, letting it run up the side. I didn't mean it was such a bad thing to be a complaining person, she said. Don't go and get your feelings hurt. As they pushed off down the river again, Tiller said, Florida, aside from that scary toothless lunatic's place, did you and Dallas ever get sent anywhere else? Oh, sure, Florida said, dipping her paddle slowly into the water. You want to hear about the Hoppers, who said that we were thieves, or the Cranbeps, who thought we were brutes, or the nasty Burgerton boys? Why don't you start with the Hoppers, he said. Chapter 36 is called A Long Chain. The air was hot and sticky as Sari and Dallas thrashed their way through a thicket. Vines tangled their legs and briars jabbed their arms. It looked like this would be the shortest route over to that path on that hill, but I don't know now, Sari said. Let's stop and rest a bit, okay? She reached into her backpack and pulled from it a yellow scarf, which she tied around her neck. If she'd worn something like that at home, Tiller would have said, What's that around your neck? You never wear scarves. But here, Dallas didn't know and wouldn't care whether she was the kind of person who would wear a yellow scarf or not. She felt a little silly thinking about it. There's more bugs here than in the holler. Did you notice that? Dallas said, swatting at the flies. Maybe my lucky yellow scarf will keep 'em away, Sari said. Maybe your lucky scarf will help us find water. I bet there's a creek right down there. I bet it's real clear, not some old muddy poison creek. We'll splash in it and drink as much as we want. Sari sat against the tree and closed her eyes. She imagined that there was an invisible ball of twine unfolding behind her, all the way back across the hills to Ruby Holler. That invisible ball of twine was right there in her hand, and she had to hold to it tight, because if she let go of it, she and Dallas would be lost out here. What are you thinking about so serious like? Dallas asked her. Nothing much, she said. You're not homesick, are you? Me? Shoot, no. We're on our adventure, Sari said. I'm not homesick at all. You know who you look like sitting there? You know that picture in your kitchen of the girl and the lady sitting in the woods? You look like that lady. I do. That's my mother. And that girl is me, Sari said. She felt a sudden deep longing for her dead mother, and then she wondered if it was harder to miss your mother if you had loved her or not, like Dallas and Florida. Or she wondered if it was harder to miss your mother you had loved, or like Dallas in Florida, to miss a mother you'd never known. And that picture next to it, Dallas said, with the two men, who are they? That's Tiller and his daddy. And the one next to that, the one of the couple by the creek, that's my grandmother and grandfather. And the one next to that, that's me and Tiller and our kids. It's like a whole long chain of connected people, Dallas said. Yes, Sari said, I guess it is. Want me to build a little fire? Dallas said. I know it's hot, but we could eat that can of beans. They'd be better hot than cold. You got the matches? Matches? Sari said. Chapter 37 Word Pictures. Florida and Tiller were letting the swift current carry them along. Florida had just finished telling Tiller about the Hoppers and the Cranbeps and the Burgertons when Tiller made an odd sound as if he were in pain. What's the matter? She said. Are you feeling poorly? She turned around and saw him with his chin bent against his chest. I'm feeling like I want to strangle those Hoppers and Cranbeps and Burgerton boys, he said. Don't you go feeling poorly over it, she said. You forget the worst bits after a while. Sometimes Dallas and I pretend it happened to somebody else. And you know what Dallas says? He says that it don't mean nothing. That someday we're going to live in a glorious place and we'll both get married to real nice people and we'll each have 20 kids of our own. 20? Maybe more, Florida said. And we won't let anybody be mean to those kids, not ever. And our kids will grow up and get married and have bunches of kids of their own, and they'll treat their kids good, and it'll go on like that forever and ever. Florida liked that picture. Maybe it was good that Dallas was dreamy, she thought, because whenever she was feeling as if everything was dark and scary and putrid, Dallas would paint word pictures that would fly into her mind and scatter the dark and scary things. When they'd been locked in the toothless lunatic's cellar, Dallas had talked all night about how they would live in a clean place someday, up in the woods maybe, and all around would be beautiful trees and clear rivers, and only people nearby would be good ones, nice ones, no mean ones allowed. And on he went all through the night making word pictures. Chapter 38 is called Surveying. Z had made his way down to Ruby Holler and was sitting on Tiller and Sari's porch. Sweat dripped from his face as he leaned back against the shaded wall. That Trepid fellow had gone a little too far this time. Z didn't for a minute believe that Trepid wanted to know where Tiller and Sari might have found oil. He was up to something else, and Z had a pretty good idea what it was. Z could have refused Trepid's request right off the bat, but he figured that Trepid would just find somebody else to do his dirty work, and that wouldn't be any good. At least this way Z could stall Trepid until he figured out what to do. Z circled the cabin, glancing in the windows. Then he stood and looked around the yard. He spotted a pile of stones near the well and another pile beside the porch steps. There were stones by the barn path and a big gray stone near the fir tree. From his pocket he took the pencil and paper that he'd brought with him. He drew a square for the cabin and X's around it where the stones were. He hoped he found lots of stones. Lots and lots and lots of them. Chapter 39 is called The Worrywarts. Dallas and Sari had stopped for the day in a scrubby clearing. They were pinned by dense trees and the ground was rocky, but it was the best place they could find to set up camp. They'd eaten cold beans and they were trying to ignore their thirst. Sari had settled herself on a flat stone and pulled out the block of wood and her whittling knife when Dallas said, Sari, I don't get it. I mean, what do you want to go to someplace else where you don't have your own bed that you're used to, and you don't have all that good food that you make, and there's all these bugs, and... Sari sniffed. Well, if we ever do go to Kangadoon, I'm sure it'll be worth the trip. If we go to Kangadoon, Dallas said. If? I meant when we go, Sari said. I don't know why I said if. Dallas stared at Sari, who looked as if she might cry, and that shocked him. He couldn't imagine her crying, but trying to picture it made him remember a time when Mrs. Trepid had grabbed a hold of Florida and shook her. Why don't you ever cry, Mrs. Trepid had demanded. And Florida had replied, "'Cause I don't putrid want to." But Florida did cry sometimes. She cried at the Hoppers, and at the Cranbeps, and at the Burgertons, and at the Creepy Dreeps. Dallas hadn't cried at those places. He didn't know why he hadn't. Maybe it was because Florida was crying enough for the two of them, or because he'd wanted to cheer her up. Dallas had cried after Joey died, but no one saw him cry except for Florida. And sometimes at night at the home he cried, and if Florida heard him, she would sneak into the closet and lift the cardboard flap and say, "Don't think about it, Dallas. It'll go away." Out in the woods now with Sari, Dallas pulled his own block of wood out and studied it. He'd already chipped at one end, but he hadn't figured out what was inside yet. "What's that one you're carving?" he asked Sari. "Not sure yet," Sari said. "Just have to see what comes out. How about yours?" "No idea. Maybe another robin." "You don't have to find a bird in yours," Sari said. "Maybe there's something else inside yours." "Like what?" Dallas said. "I don't know. Could be anything at all." "It's probably a slug," Dallas said, "or a slimy worm." He felt odd, as if he was talking like Florida, or a putrid rat thing. It made him laugh to talk like Florida. "You know what I was thinking," Sari said. "I was remembering a time when Tiller and I were out walking in the holler. This was a long time ago, before our kids were even born. And there in the middle of the path was a perfect piece of wood, and we both reached for it." "Did you fight over it?" Dallas asked. "You pull it back and forth?" "Not exactly. I mean, not the way you're thinking. We stayed there for a few minutes, bent over, both of us touching that wood. And I was thinking, why doesn't he let go and let me have it? If he loves me, he'll let me have it." Tiller was probably thinking the same thing. If she loves me, she'll let me have it. Sari put one finger against her lips and tapped softly as if she were coaxing more words out of her mouth. "Finally," I said, "I thought there was a perfect bird in that piece of wood. I could see it in my mind. This little bird nestled in that wood, waiting for me to set it free." Dallas examined the piece of wood in his hands, wondering why he couldn't see what was inside. "And," Sari continued, "Tiller said that he could see a perfect boat in that piece of wood. A perfect, perfect boat, just waiting to be let loose." "So, which was it? A boat or a bird? Who won?" Sari tapped at her lips. "He gave in first. He said, 'You have it.' And I snatched it up, and I was so happy. And on we walked, and as we walked, I started to feel bad. I was trying to picture myself taking the first slivers off this perfect piece of wood. What if I ruined it? What if there was no perfect bird inside? So I told Tiller, 'Here, you have it.'" "Did he take it?" Dallas asked. "He took it so fast I didn't even have time to blink," Sari said. "And he made a perfect boat out of the piece of wood?" "Nope. For days and days I saw him holding that piece of wood, turning it around and around. He'd get out his knife, but he just couldn't seem to take the first cut. Then, you know what he did? He placed that piece of wood on our dresser, and he said, 'Sari, I'm putting this here for a while. It'll belong to both of us. Whoever wants to get started on it can do it.' So you grabbed it, right?" "I wanted to," Sari said. "I could hardly contain myself. I'd go in the bedroom and touch that piece of wood, but I just couldn't put my knife to it. And then, when I wasn't in there, I'd be worrying that he was in there getting started on it." "You two sure are weird," Dallas said. "Everybody's a little weird, Dallas. So, who finally got the wood?" Sari grinned. "It's still there, right on our dresser. A piece of wood with who knows what inside." Dallas held his block of wood to his ear, as if maybe he could hear what was inside. "Sari, are we lost?" "Lost? Us? Shoot. We're on this scrubby patch of dirt on this hillside. Maybe we don't know where exactly this hillside is, but I'm sure we'll be just fine. Just fine." She reached up and touched her yellow scarf as if it might bring them luck. "Sari, did you ever wonder if Tiller might be getting used to being on his own?" Sari flashed him a worried look. "I was thinking about that a little earlier," Sari said. "You can read my mind. I was thinking how maybe we'd get used to this hiking, and maybe I'd stop thinking about the Holler or Tiller. Then I felt bad. Like, what if Tiller forgot to think about me?" "Yeah," Dallas said. "And what if Florida gets used to traveling on the river and doesn't want to come back, and maybe she won't want me tagging along?" "Listen to us," Sari said. "A couple of worrywarts." "Yeah," Dallas said. "A couple of stupid worrywarts." Chapter 40. Babies in the Box. Tiller and Florida had traveled the length of Hidden River and had spent the last 2 hours portaging in the Gucci River. "It's so beastly hot," Florida said, "and I thought you said portaging would be easy. It wasn't easy. Look how long it took us, lugging all of our stuff out of the boat and up the bank and over those rocks and then dragging that heavy boat up the bank. And why do we bring so much stuff? Tiller grumbled. Every time we portage, we're going to have to lug all this crud. He eyed the dark storm clouds in the distance. We better get that tin up or we're going to get soaked tonight, Tiller said. You smell that? It's a real goose drounder that's coming our way. Later, as the storm clouds broke above them, they sat under the canopy of the tent while the remains of their fire steamed and fizzled. Tiller was carving a fishing boat, and Florida was staring at her piece of wood. Look what a mess I've made of this, she said. I don't know what the cruddy crud it is. You don't have to know when you start out, Tiller said. Just see what comes out. Sometimes you have to sneak up on it. Pretend you're just moving your hand, your knife. You don't even think about what you're making. Then all of a sudden you look down quick, and sometimes you can tell right then. But you still pretend you don't know because you don't want what's inside to curl up tighter and refuse to come out. You want to be gentle with it. Florida closed her eyes, rolled the wood around in her hands, and then she opened her eyes quickly and stared down at the wood. Nothing. Whoa, she said. Did you see that lightning? Are we supposed to be out here when that stuff's crashing all around us? What if it hits a tree and the tree falls on us and conks us dead? I guess someone will find our smashed up bodies someday, Tiller said. Tiller, did you ever see a dead person? I mean a real dead person, not a picture of one. Tiller thought about his father lying cold on his bed and his mother in her coffin. He thought about his two best friends who'd died last year. Yes, he said, I've seen a few. Have you ever seen a dead person? Yep. And who was that? A boy in our orphanage place. Dallas couldn't save him. What? So she told him about Joey and his fever and about Dallas watching over him and Joey saying, Who am I? Who am I? And Dallas trying to get him to breathe again. That's terrible, Tiller said. Where were the Trepids? They were there. Mr. Trepid was crying and Mrs. Trepid was yelling at him and terrible, terrible. You know what, Dallas? Dallas didn't talk. I mean, he didn't say a single word for a whole month after that. What about you? How did you feel? I felt like it was probably going to be me who died next, Florida said, and so I wrote my name on my arm in red ink, so even if I was delirious with a fever, I'd know who I was. And I told Dallas that even if he couldn't get me to breathe again, it wouldn't be his fault. If I didn't breathe again, it would probably be because I didn't have any room left for air. Tiller poked at the damp wood and ashes. Florida, do you mind if I ask you something? If it's nosy, you just ignore it. Like what? I was thinking about your name, Florida. It's a mighty nice name. You probably don't have any idea how you got it, do you? I only know what those putrid Trepids told us. And what was that? Tiller asked. They told us we were in a box on their porch, little babies, both of us in the same box, and there wasn't any note or anything. We were wrapped up in a clean white blanket, and the box was lined with papers. Well, not papers exactly, but pamphlets. You know, those kind you see for people going on trips and stuff. What, like tourist pamphlets, that sort of thing? That's right, Florida said, and I was lying on one that said Fly to Florida, and Dallas was lying on one that said Destination Dallas. And so they gave us those names. I was Florida baby, and Dallas was the Dallas baby. I wonder why those things were in the bottom of that box, Tiller said. Do you ever wonder that? You know what? I never did wonder that, not until you just said it. Our mother probably just found an old box, and it had that stuff in it. She probably didn't pay any attention. She probably just wrapped us up in that clean white blanket and put us inside. Maybe she wrote a note about how awful she felt about having to give us up. And on our note, that note was our real names, but maybe the wind blew that note away. You think? Could be, Tiller said. How about your last name? Carter, isn't it? How'd you get that? On the side of the box, it said Carter's Produce. Ah, Tiller said. Well, Florida Carter, it's a lot better than Florida Produce. Or Florida Box. Tiller touched the piece of wood that Florida had been whittling away at. You see what's happening there? You've been talking and carving and paying no attention, and now look there. Florida stared down at it. What do you think it is? Some curly-headed thing? I don't know. I bet if you keep paying no attention, it'll come out. That's just what I'm going to do, Florida said. Pay no attention whatsoever. Chapter 41 is called Shopping. When Mrs. Trepid entered Burley's department store and felt the cool air swirl around her, she put her hand against the damp hair on her neck. Such a relief to be where it's cool, she thought. Such a relief to be where it's quiet. In the dress department, she wandered from rack to rack, occasionally pulling out a dress and holding it against her. Too dowdy, she thought, or too prissy. And then she saw it, the perfect dress. It was pale blue silk with tiny pink flowers, ankle length and sleeveless with a low scooped neck. She held it against her and swished the bottom across her legs. Mrs. Trepid carried it into the fitting room, and once she had the dress on and zipped, she turned and saw the mirror. This is how I should always look, she thought. She stepped out into the hallway where there was a larger mirror, and she turned this way and that. A young salesgirl walked by with her armload of clothes. That dress was made for you, the girl said to Mrs. Trepid. Do you really think so? Mrs. Trepid said, turning a full revolution so the girl could see it from all angles. Oh, yes, the girl said, and you could wear it for so many occasions. Mrs. Trepid put her fingertips to her chin and regarded her reflection. You know, I think you might be right. In the dressing room, Mrs. Trepid changed back into her own dress and took out her glasses and examined the price tag. My goodness, she thought, that much money for a skimpy little dress? She thought about what her husband had said about his investments and about moving to an island. This would be perfect for an evening on an island. She found the salesgirl at the counter. You know, she said to the girl, I can't quite make up my mind about this dress. But it's made for you, the girl said. You know what you could do? You could put it on layaway. Pay a little now and a little each month, and then it seems like you get it for practically nothing. I do it all the time. Mrs. Trepid felt embarrassed that the girl could sense that she couldn't afford the dress. Of course, I don't really need to use layaway, Mrs. Trepid said. I could buy it right now if I wanted. Oh, the girl said. But I might just try that layaway thing out. Why not? But after she left the dress department, Mrs. Trepid wandered around the store, touching purses and scarves and slips. She sauntered back through the dress department, pausing at the rack where she'd found the dress. As she did so, she heard the salesgirl talking to another customer. That dress was made for you, the girl said to the customer. Mrs. Trepid felt foolish. She hurriedly left the department. But as she stepped out onto the hot sidewalk, she thought about her blue silk dress with the pink flowers. She saw herself on an island, sitting by the ocean, sipping a cool drink. On the outskirts of Prosper City, some 50 miles from Boxton, Mr. Trepid found a Cadillac showroom. Inside, he circled the three cars on the display, casually examining the tags which listed the specifications and equipment, as well as the price of each vehicle. After he examined all three, he returned to the red convertible and stood with his hand on the driver's door. He could smell the leather interior. May I help you? Came a voice from behind him. Mr. Trepid kept his hand on the door, and he turned to greet the salesman. The man was taller than Mr. Trepid and smiled down on him. I'm considering buying a new car, Mr. Trepid said soberly. Perhaps one like this. He tapped the door of the red convertible. What are you driving now? The salesman asked. What? Now? Me? I'm driving a Porsche, he lied. The salesman glanced out the window as if he was looking for Mr. Trepid's Porsche. It's in the shop right now, Mr. Trepid said. That's why I'm looking for a new car. Getting tired of that Porsche. He tried to look disgusted at the thought of his Porsche in the shop. What Mr. Trepid really owned was a 10-year-old Plymouth. He'd had the foresight to park it 3 blocks away so that the salesman wouldn't see his battered old car. So, you'll be doing a trade-in then, said the salesman. On your Porsche? Probably not, Mr. Trepid said, smiling heartily at the salesman. I think I'll give the Porsche to the wife. Ah, the salesman said. Will you be wanting financing? Would you like to talk with our finance manager? Mr. Trepid tapped the door once more. I may pay cash, he said. I see. What did you say your name was, sir? Trepid. George Trepid. Well, Mr. Trepid, are there any questions I can answer for you, sir? Mr. Trepid had 100 questions, but he wasn't going to ask them of this salesman. He didn't want to appear ignorant. I think not, Mr. Trepid said coolly. I'm going to go check out another dealership first. I think you'll find that we'll give you the best deal, the salesman said. Here's my card. Anything I can do for you, you just let me know. Thank you, Mr. Trepid said, stuffing the card in his shirt pocket and glancing at his watch. And now I must be off. Perhaps I'll see you again. He hurried to the door and stepped out into the bright sunlight. Well, he thought, I think that went very well indeed. Chapter 42 is called Dorkhead. In the morning, as Sari was repacking, she lifted her half-carved piece and said, You know what I think I'll do with these carvings sometimes? I make up names for them. Silly names like Peeker and Bitty Beak, just made up names. I have a made up name, Dallas said. What do you mean? You know, Dallas. It's just a name those Trippets got from a box. A box? And so he told her about the box that he and Florida had been found in. And when he finished, Sari said, Dallas, do you remember when we got your passport? Stupid picture. I look like a dork head. No, you don't. You look mighty handsome. But did you notice the birth date on it? Yeah, March 3rd. Dork heads. My birthday's July 29th. But maybe your birthday really is March 3rd. Nah, Dallas said. You think? Nah, I don't want a March birthday. You're right. I understand. That Trepid fellow probably just made a mistake. But later, as they set off down the hill, Dallas remembered, or thought he remembered, the Trepids telling him that since they didn't really have any idea of when Dallas or Florida were really born, the Trepids had listed their birthday as the day they arrived at the orphanage. So Dallas thought their real birthday must have been several months before that. Maybe March 3rd was his real birthday. It made him mad. A person ought to know when his birthday was. Chapter 43 is called Loops. When they'd first set off down the river, Florida had imagined all the rivers they would travel would be as narrow as the one passing through Ruby Holler, and that it was all just water running smoothly on and on and on. What she now knew, after only a day and a half on the river, was that rivers were like living things, and they had many faces. You might come around a bend, and wham! The river suddenly widened out and ran faster. And just when you got used to that wide, rushing river, you go around another bend, and then wham! It narrowed again, and put a few rocks in your way, and a few eddies to swirl you around, and maybe a sandbar to stop you short. You might start out in the morning with the river like a velvety, shimmery cloth, and by noon it would be full of ripples and waves and splashes. You could watch both wind and rain coming at you from the distance, marking the water. As the sun went down, all sorts of golden light flashed here and there, and long shadows stretched farther and farther until it was all one big black shadowy thing out there. As they paddled along on this new morning, Florida said, Tonight I'm going to catch another big fish like last night. Wasn't that a beauty? Didn't that taste like the best thing you ever tasted in your life? I'm a natural-born fisherwoman. Maybe my mother was a fisherwoman, do you think? Could be, Tiller said. Is your arm okay where I hooked you? Uh-huh, he said. You think we can get that reel untangled? Uh-huh. Tiller, how come you don't get mad at me when I goof up? She heard his paddle dip in and out of the water, in and out. You hear me? I heard you. Maybe I'm too old to get mad, or maybe what you consider goofs aren't what I consider goofs. It's just stuff that happens. Most people would consider everything I do a goof. Then they're just putrid, Tiller said, and he laughed. Putrid, what a great word. So you don't mind too much about me and Dallas being in Ruby Holler? She heard Tiller's paddle dipping in and out of the water, in and out. If you mind, you can say so. She stared at the river ahead. Why didn't he answer her? What was he thinking? Finally, he said, Florida, it's been putrid having you and Dallas in Ruby Holler. What? She snapped her head around. I was just kidding, he said. It's been real interesting having you and Dallas in Ruby Holler. Good interesting or bad interesting, she asked. You know, I can't say bad interesting, or you'd probably tip me out of this boat. So I guess I'll have to say good interesting. Florida stared at the water. Tiller, how come we're paddling so hard and getting nowhere? Does it feel like we're going upstream instead of downstream? You know, when we went to the right of that island back there, Tiller said, and then the river looped. Yeah, I remember. It's been looping ever since. Maybe we should have gone to the other way, to the other side of that island, Tiller said. What does the map say? Tiller placed his paddle across his knees and reached for the map. I don't see any island on this map. I don't see any loops. You're not telling me we're lost, are you? I think we might be a little bit lost, Tiller said. If it's just a little bit lost, that's okay, I guess. And that's the end of chapter 43, and we'll stop there for today.